Beauty surrounds us. Beauty surrounds us. But usually we have to be walking in a garden to know it, that beauty surrounds us. To know, beauty surrounds us.
Thank you. Thank you, Billy. Had to step out and get my microphone on. Good morning, everyone. How are you? Well, happy Sunday, everybody. I want to start off this morning by reading a quote in our book that we've been working with. The book we've been working with, of course, is Ask Yourself This, Questions to Open the Heart, Expand the Mind, and Awaken the Soul. And this is a quote from Albert Einstein that Wendy starts off chapter 6. He says, the important thing is not to stop questioning. Curiosity has its own reason for existing. I like that phrase just in itself. Curiosity has its own reason for existing. One cannot help but be in awe when one contemplates the mysteries of eternity, of life, of the marvelous structure of reality. It is enough if one tries merely to comprehend a little of this mystery every day. Never lose a holy curiosity. I love that phrase itself. Never lose a holy curiosity. Well, you know, to me, really a big part of what we've been working with is helping to re-spark and rekindle that curiosity. And by asking questions that help us to really open up our awareness to the mysteries of life, but more than anything, the mysteries of ourselves. We have a tendency to get into routines and ways of looking and ways of thinking and ways of seeing things. And part of the idea is that by asking more questions that we open ourselves up to other possibilities and other answers. So we're continuing with this series to kind of expand our awareness and to continue to learn new ways of looking and thinking and seeing things. I came across a story that I like. A fellow stopped at a gas station, and after filling up his tank, he went inside and paid his bill and bought himself a soda, and that's what they call a Coke down here in the South, you know. But he bought himself a Coke, and he was sitting out by his car, kind of and just resting a little bit before he continued on his journey. And he's sitting there sipping his Coke, and as he's drinking, he noticed that there was a crew coming down the road, and one guy had a shovel, and he was digging a hole, and then had a row of holes that he had dug already, and about 25 yards down there was a guy that came along with another shovel, and it was filling in the holes. And he kind of was curious and watched them for a while until they finally actually went all the way past him, and finally it just got to him. He said, I just have to go find out what's going on. So he went over and talked to the first guy, and he says, can you guys tell me what you're doing here? And he says, well, yeah, we're planting trees. And he says, what do you mean you're planting trees? And he says, well, that's our job. You know, we work for the road department, and our job is to plant trees. He said, my job is to dig the holes, and his job is to fill them in after, you know. And he said, but who's planting the trees? Oh, that's Jesse. He's out sick today. But up. Well, you know, sometimes we get into routines in life, and we continue to do things the way we've always done things. And I think that's one of the things that helps us to make life in some ways more comfortable for us. But at the same time, it also is one of the things that can actually limit how we are living and experiencing life. Jesus gave us some really good teachings about this. So our lesson this week is tapping into our inner genius, asking questions that help us to tap into our inner genius. And Jesus' parable about putting new wine into old wineskins, I think is very apropos when we think about this. He said, you don't put new wine into old wineskins. And he was really, I think, referring primarily to our thinking and our way of looking at things and a way of seeing things. You don't put new awarenesses, you can't really put new awarenesses into an old way of looking at life. If you do, he says that the wineskins will burst, and so they won't be able to contain it. So what we're really talking about metaphorically and metaphysically is really shifting and changing the internal awarenesses that we are holding and that we are keeping in our lives. He gave us another teaching about the parable of the sower, and it's called the parable of the sower, but one of the things that Wendy says is I think it really is much more about the seed than it is about the sower. He summarizes the parable in the story, and the man goes out, he sows the seed, and as he's sowing the seed, some of them fall on the path that's been trodden and it's hard packed, and some of the seed falls among the thorns and the rocks, and they soon were burned up by the sun because they didn't have enough depth to them. And some of the seeds fall among the thorns where they're choked out by the weeds. And some of them actually fall onto good soil where they take root and they're being held in a good way and nurtured in a good way, and then they blossom. So when we talk about that, he's talking about our minds. He's talking about the awareness, and he's talking about consciousness. He's talking about a way of looking at and understanding what goes on inside of us in life. Oftentimes, we need to make sure that when we are listening to and looking at all the different experiences that are going on in our world, anybody have have you ever had a problem that you just couldn't resolve? That it just seems like they're kind of ongoing, right? There are some that seem to kind of just hang around and stick around. And I think that's actually a part of, it's actually pretty normal to have that, believe it or not. It's actually not necessarily the most valuable thing for us at times when we get stuck in a particular place. But the reality is there are certain problems that come into our lives and that we have in life that are there for the purpose of telling us to stop doing what we've been doing. Does that make sense? We keep approaching the same problem the same way over and over again. In other words, we're trying to fix the problem with the same level of thinking that has created the problem in the first place, right? So, you know that wonderful saying that if you always do what you've always done, you always get what you always got. So part of what we're learning to do is look at life a little differently and ask a different question. And when you find yourself dealing with a problem, just asking the question simply, is there another way that I can approach this? We've had different ways of approaching it. We've tried, a lot of times we think we're trying different ways, and what we're really doing is putting a whole nother flavor on the same way that we're doing it. But what we're really talking about is moving into a whole nother understanding and awareness about the possibilities of moving through whatever we are experiencing in that particular circumstance and situation. What we have a tendency to do is, rather than trying to get this part of it to change, we try to get this part of it to change. And what I mean by that is trying to get something out here to change, that doesn't work, so we go over here and try and get something else out here to change, or someone else out here to change. You know what and if that doesn't work, then we try to get someone over here to change, and we figure that's somehow going to take care of the issue, rather than really asking the right questions. Is there a different way that I can approach this situation or circumstance or problem? You can fill in the blanks with this, with all kinds of opportunities, can't you? We all have different ways that we're dealing with life and looking at things, and we're not necessarily always in the place where we are open to seeing or looking or thinking or approaching the problem from a different perspective. There was a great story that Wendy tells about the city of St. Petersburg in Russia. And in the 18th century, the city fathers wanted to lay out this beautiful grand scale of sweeping boulevards throughout the city. And they had laid out a very beautiful design for how that would work, and very functional in the way that would really work best for the city. And what they discovered as they were building it out, they discovered that there was this huge, enormous boulder right in the middle of where they were planning on laying one of their main roads, the main thoroughfares. And in order to go around it, it would have thrown their whole design completely off. And so they decided to put out to bid for anyone who could come and move this huge, monstrous boulder. Now, this is before they had cranes, and they had even engines at that time that could do this kind of thing. And so they put it out to all these different engineering firms, and the engineering firms, they came back, and the price was just going to be enormous, because it was going to take thousands of men and hundreds of horses and a whole forest of trees and timber to be able to move this thing. And they finally gave the contract to a peasant who came and put in a very low bid and got the contract. And what this peasant did, he came with just a few of his friends, and he and a few of his friends came along, and they dug a small trench, and then that trench led to a ginormous hole that swallowed up the whole boulder, and then they filled in the hole and covered it over, and they built the street on top of it. So, duh, we kind of think about that, but what happens is we're so used to thinking about problems in a particular way. We tend to think about them more on a two-dimensional level. The engineers were thinking about, well, they had to move the boulder from point A over to point B to get it out of the way. Well, you do have to move it from point A to point B, but they didn't recognize or think about that point B may be down as opposed to laterally. How often do we approach our problems in the same way? We're thinking about them on a two-dimensional level. We think about our financial situation and circumstances and think then that we have to go and do something out here to make things different in terms of our financial situation. What about in terms of our health? Sometimes we think we have to go and do something out here to make something different in our health, and sometimes we do. Sometimes that's absolutely true. We do have to move from point A to point B still. But there's another level and another awareness and another dimension that we need to recognize and understand, even in dealing with our financial situation, with our health, with our relationships, with our work situations. You know, when we are looking for work in a particular job and we put out thousands and thousands of resumes, that's one level of understanding that we do want to do that. We want to be able to put those out there. We do need to put them out there. But there's a whole nother level of awareness that we want to move into in order to draw to us our right experiences, our right jobs. That's true also in terms of people who are trying to do hiring. If you're hiring, trying to find just your right person, you want to work not just on this level, you want to work on a higher level. You want to work on a different dimension of understanding and a different dimension of thinking, and what I would call the spiritual level. The spiritual level really is tuning into an awareness that within every one of us there is an intelligence and awareness, there is a universal mind that has understanding and experiences that are beyond the limits of our own understandings and belief systems. And we need to be able to ask the questions that open us up to the greater possibilities in life. We get stuck oftentimes in two-dimensional thinking, don't we? Thinking about things just on this level, out in this world. But there's a whole nother level of awareness and experience and part of our being that can move us into even greater possibilities than we ever dreamed or imagined possible. Love that story. It just really speaks very truly, I think, to all of us and the possibilities that are available to us. There was a story about a professor who was having in a math class in Germany, and he was getting frustrated with some of the acting out behavior of some of the students. And so he, as a punishment, he decided to give them a problem. And the problem was to add all the numbers from 1 to 100 and come up with the right answer. In other words, add 1 and 2 plus 1 and 2 plus 3, and keep adding all the numbers until they came up with the right answer. And somehow that was supposed to be a punishment. I don't know, some of the kids would probably love that. But anyway, so there was one kid in the class that was just kind of looking out the window, and all the other kids were just scribbling and figuring and writing and figuring. And he was just kind of gazing out the window, and then in a moment he just wrote down a number, walked in and handed it in before everyone else. And the instructor was amazed because he was the only one that actually came up with the right answer. And so he asked him afterwards, well, how is it that you did that? How is it? And he says, well, I figured there must be some shortcut. There must be some way. Notice that there could be patterns in addition. And so he figured out that 1 plus 1, of course, is 101. 2 plus 99 is 101. 3 plus 98 is 101. So he discovered very quickly that there are 50 such pairs. And so he figured out that he could add 50 and 50, and he would have the answer, and the answer was 5,050. So if you add all the numbers from 1 to 100, it winds up being 5,050. He had the right answer, and he didn't have to go through all the calculations to get it. He figured out there was a quicker and easier way. Well, the guy actually wound up becoming one of the most premier mathematicians in the world at one point. I've lost his name here. I had it in my notes. And Frederick Gauss wound up becoming, in the 19th century, his math teacher was so impressed that and not so impressed even that he came up with the answer, but how he came up with the answer. He said the most important thing was not that he came up with the answer, but how he came up with the answer. He didn't necessarily go through all of the same kinds of steps and procedures. He saw that there might be a different way of looking at this and approaching it. And he said that's the secret, really, of all discovery. All discovery is really about seeing things in a different way. That's true of our lives, if you really think about it. It's true of all the things that are going on for you right now, and it's true for the problem that you're dealing with right now. Whatever problem you came into your mind when I asked you if you had a problem, if we are continuing to work through that same problem in the same way, we are actually trying to move the boulder from point A to point B, rather than allowing ourselves to recognize there's a different way of seeing this opportunity for us to expand our awareness. So there's another wonderful question to ask ourselves to release our inner genius. And one of the ways that really we tend to get stuck is we tend to think that our thinking is the right way of thinking. You get what I'm saying? We tend to think that our thinking is the right way of thinking. And that it automatically keeps us stuck in a certain awareness and level of thinking. It puts us in a box in a very real way. So the question to really ask yourself is, what assumptions am I making? What assumptions, and am I assuming that whatever I'm thinking is the truth? I think it was Mark Twain who said, it's not so much that we need to, it's not so much that the things that we learn are not true, it's just that many of the things that we learned are, it's all the things that we learned in our lives that are just ain't so that are really our problem. We learned a lot of things in our lives that are really not true. But there's a part of us that will tell us they're absolutely true because someone said it, and we bought it, and we believed it. We accepted it. And so what assumptions are we making? Are we assuming that we are thinking in the same way and thinking that our thinking is absolutely what is real? Or are we open to the possibilities that our thinking may be a part of the problem? I love what Eckhart Tolle says, don't believe everything that you think. It frees us up to recognize that thinking is a process, and it's a valuable process, but the moment that we assume that what we're thinking is absolutely the truth, then we've limited our ability to come up with other possibilities and other answers in life. The great story that Wendy tells about a wonderful couple that, I love this story, making pot roast. making pot roast. And one of the wonderful things that, so there's a couple that were making pot roast, and the wife takes a knife and cuts off both ends of the pot roast. And he says, well, what are you doing? He says, well, I'm making pot roast. And he says, well, why are you cutting off the ends of the pot roast? Because that's the way you make pot roast. He said, well, no, we didn't do that in my family. That's not the way I learned to make pot roast. He says, well, that is the way you make pot roast. I learned it from my mother, and she learned it from her grandmother. That's the way you make a pot roast. And he said, well, I don't know. Of course, then the argument ensues, right? And so there's the argument. And so they decide finally they're going to call the mother and find out what the story is. So they call the mother up, and she says, yeah, that's the way you make a pot roast. You cut the ends off of it. And they said, why? I said, well, I don't know. That's what grandmother always did, and that's the way she told me to do it, so that's what I did. Well, okay, well, let's go call grandmother. So they call grandmother, and grandmother's just listening to this story and just kind of giggling and saying, well, I cut off the ends of the pot roast because I didn't have a big enough pot to put it in. How often are we making assumptions that what we have learned is the truth, is real? Sometimes we need to ask some questions. We need to look at what are the assumptions that we've made in life. Not long ago, there was a Southwest Airlines flight that, and the flight attendant came on the air and announced that we have a very special person on board today. He's 99 years old. He celebrates his birthday, and this is the first time he's ever flown. And as you can imagine, you know, the cabin breaks out in cheers and everything, everybody applause, and she continued to say, so be sure and on your way out, stop by and wish the captain a happy birthday. Making assumptions, right? Oh, boy, we have to challenge ourselves sometimes. We have to challenge ourselves in our ways of looking at things, and could what we are hearing and what we have heard and what we have learned in our lives be something other than what is really the truth for us in this time, in this circumstance, in this situation? Is it really true? Is it really true? One of the other questions that she says to ask yourself is, could they be wrong? You know the they that she's talking about? Could they be wrong? We've been taught many times to listen to they all our lives, haven't we? They and them really must know, obviously. And you know, one of the things that I'm absolutely convinced, if it's on the internet, it's got to be true, right? Because they said so. They wouldn't surely they wouldn't publish it on the internet if it wasn't true. Well, we know that's not true. We know that a good bit of what we see out on the internet, other than coming to Unity here, of course, I mean, that's it's important for us to recognize that what we are reading and what we're seeing is not necessarily the truth. We need to ask ourselves the question, is this true, and is this true for me now? Is this always true? Is another great question to ask. Is it always true, or is it just a local, limited truth for me at this time, in this moment? Sometimes we find that we ask these questions, and the truth that we have absolutely accepted as being true is not true for everybody, and it doesn't necessarily hold that everything that we think and see and believe is the truth on with a capital T. I came across George Carlin's always funny. He says, I can prove anything with statistics except the truth. That's true, isn't it? So here's a couple of things. Here's a quote. I think there is a world market for maybe 5 computers. This was Tom Watson, the chairman of IBM in 1943. In 1968, let's see, it's interesting, but what is it good for? It was an engineer at IBM commenting on the microchip. Here's another one. The concept is interesting and well-formed, but in order to earn better than a C, the idea has to be feasible. This was from Yale University's management professor in response to Fred Smith's paper proposing reliable overnight delivery services. Smith went on to found Federal Express. Here's one. We told Atari, we got this amazing thing built with some of your parts. What do you think about funding us? Or we'll just give it to you. We just want to do it. Pay our salaries. We'll come to work for you. And they said no. So then we went to the Hewlett-Packard and they said, hey, we don't need you. You haven't even gone through college yet. This was from Apple computer founder Steve Jobs. And this is one I really love. I think the best one, in many ways, everything that can be invented has already been invented. This was said by Charles Duell in 1899. So what are you letting someone tell you is the truth? What assumptions are you making? Are you asking the right questions? Are you asking yourself, is my thinking really true on this circumstance and situation? Or is there a different way of looking at it? Is it possible that I only have part of the picture? Is it possible that there's a whole nother level of awareness and understanding that I can tune into? Is it possible that this boulder that I'm calling a problem in my life has another dimension that would allow it to be moved in a way that I had not considered or thought of before? Great questions to ask ourselves, great opportunities for expanding our awareness into tuning into the greater awareness and consciousness of spirit that's within every one of us. You have within you a greatness, as we have heard in our daily word even this morning, and there's a greatness in you. There's a greatness in our song this morning, talking about this greatness. And part of what helps us to open that up is keeping that interest and curiosity about what the possibilities are. So as you approach whatever this thing that has been going on for you, look at it from a little higher perspective, look at it from maybe a little lower perspective, but look at it from a way that you haven't seen or approached it before, and see if you don't begin to get some insights and understandings of other possibilities. That's our lesson for the week. Have fun with it. Have a good time. Don't struggle with it too hard. Don't try and move the boulder in too many ways that can, injure yourselves. But be open to the possibility that there's a higher dimension to this experience. And that's my lesson for the week. And yours is, I hope you'll have fun with it. Let's move into our meditation time. Just take a nice deep breath and breathe into that heart space. As you breathe in and out, allow yourself to be open and receptive to the flow of your breath. And as you breathe in and out, just begin to listen, not so much in your head, but listen in your heart. One of the ways that we can expand our awareness, to be open to our inner genius, is to shift our awareness from thinking with our intellect and being open to really asking the question, what is my heart telling me? What is my heart saying to me about this? And don't try and figure it out with your head, but just listen. Listen to that still small voice that speaks through the loving, open, gracious, and compassionate heart of spirit. And see if there isn't a different approach. A different approach from a different level of awareness and thinking. Perhaps it's not even thinking, perhaps it's simply listening. And let's take this moment and this time in the silence of our being to do just that. to listen to the wisdom, the inspiration, the guidance of Spirit that comes through our heart. And now we take this time simply to give thanks. Whether we receive some insight or awareness at this time or not, we are opening the doors for that to come through. We're opening the possibilities of seeing and experiencing whatever is going on in life with a new approach. And give thanks that something new is coming through. We give thanks for the gifts of Spirit. We're grateful for the opportunities. We know that a greater good is on its way and unfolding for us even now. Thank you, thank you, thank you, Blessed Spirit. Take a nice deep breath. And so it is. And when you're ready, gently open your eyes. Be present here and now in this room, in this place, this time. With an awareness and a feeling of gratitude for the good that's here now and already on its way as well.